Darrell pulled into the parking lot of Prestige Motors, the flagship dealership he had recently acquired in sunny Scottsdale, Arizona. The desert heat shimmered off the sleek luxury vehicles parked out front, their glossy surfaces practically glowing in the afternoon sun. He parked his modest SUV in an unmarked spot at the back and stepped out, taking a moment to scan the dealership's facade. Dressed for comfort rather than attention, he wore a simple gray hoodie, slightly worn jeans, and sneakers. His outfit choice was intentional. He wanted to witness the dealership's true character and see how it operated when no one knew their new boss was observing. As he made his way to the entrance, he noticed a small group of employees chatting near the front desk, their laughter and casual conversation faintly audible through the glass doors. Darrell opened the door and stepped inside, finding the air-conditioned showroom a refreshing contrast to the heat outside. The space was filled with the subtle scent of leather and fresh wax, and rows of pristine cars gleamed under bright overhead lights. The chatter quieted as he entered, and he caught the brief glances exchanged among the employees, their eyes flicking to his hoodie and sneakers. He sensed a subtle shift in energy, a change that conveyed more than words could express. However, he was here to observe, not to judge. Then, from across the showroom, she appeared, Susan, a middle-aged woman with sharp features and an even sharper gaze. Her tailored blazer and polished heels signified authority. A clipboard tucked under her arm gave her an efficient air. She approached with determination, her heels clicking against the polished floor. At first glance, her expression was polite, but Darrell noticed a tightness in her smile that suggested otherwise. "Excuse me," Susan began, her voice cool and clipped. "Can I help you with something?" Darrell offered a calm smile. "Just here to look around," he said casually, gesturing toward the cars. Susan's eyes narrowed as she scanned him from head to toe, her polite facade slipping slightly, replaced by a hint of skepticism. "Are you shopping for a car?" she asked, her tone edged with doubt. Darrell nodded, still smiling. "Something like that." Susan's lips pursed together. "Well, we cater to a very specific clientele here. Most of our inventory requires pre-qualification. Perhaps I could recommend." Before she could finish her thought, another employee called out, "Hey, Susan, the delivery guy is here." Her attention faltered for a moment, but then her gaze snapped back to Darrell, as if to ensure he wouldn't wander too far. Darrell raised an eyebrow, but kept his voice light. "You're assuming I'm not qualified." The question seemed to catch Susan off guard, but only for a moment. She quickly regained her composure, her posture becoming stiffer. "I'm just trying to save you some time," she replied with a forced smile. "These vehicles start at 6 figures. Maybe I can direct you to—" Darrell's expression remained unchanged, but he noted her choice of words internally. His calm demeanor was intact, yet the sting of her assumptions was hard to ignore. The moment stretched out, tension hanging heavily in the air as Susan stared at him expectantly. Darrell glanced around the showroom, pretending to admire one of the nearby cars, a sleek silver coupe with an aggressive design. His fingers brushed the door handle as he looked back at Susan. "Nice car," he said simply. Her brows furrowed slightly, but she managed another smile. "It is. Perhaps when you're ready to make a serious inquiry, we can set up an appointment. For now, I'll have to ask you not to touch the vehicles." Darrell stood there for a moment, weighing her words before stepping back from the car. He nodded once, hands in his pockets, and gestured for her to continue. "All right, let's hear it. What would you recommend for someone like me?" Susan blinked, surprised by the straightforwardness of his question. Before she could respond, Darrell added, "If you think you know what I need, I'm all ears." Her polite facade cracked just enough to show the impatience beneath. "Maybe something a little more budget-friendly. I can give you directions to a dealership that specializes in pre-owned vehicles." Darrell smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. He had seen enough. "That's quite the assumption," he said softly. The statement lingered in the air, and for a brief moment, Susan faltered. Then, regaining her composure, she straightened her shoulders. "I'll be back with a list of options," she said, walking away briskly. Darrell watched her go, his expression unreadable. Turning back to the silver coupe, he saw his reflection staring back at him in its glossy finish. Today was going to be interesting. Standing in the center of the showroom with his hands in his pockets, He let his gaze drift over the lineup of cars. He wasn't one to jump to conclusions, but Susan's dismissive attitude was difficult to overlook. The staff around him had resumed their conversations, though he caught the occasional glance in his direction. It was the kind of scrutiny he had become used to over the years, the silent judgment, the coded looks. A moment later, Susan returned, her clipboard clutched tightly as if it were a shield. Her brisk walk and forced smile betrayed her annoyance. "All right," she said, stopping a few feet away from him. "I've put together a few options that might be better suited for your situation," Susan said. Darrell tilted his head slightly. "My situation?" "Yes," she replied, her tone clipped. She handed him a printout of pre-owned vehicles, each with detailed descriptions and price tags that were well below the dealership's typical offerings. "These are more accessible models, reliable, economical, and practical." Darrell took the list without saying a word, his eyes scanning the page. There was a used sedan, an older SUV, and a compact hybrid. His lips twitched in faint amusement, but he quickly hid it, folding the paper and tucking it into his pocket. "I appreciate the effort," he said, his tone even. Susan seemed momentarily taken aback by his response, but quickly regained her composure, hands resting on her hips. "Listen," she said, her voice dropping as if she were about to share a secret. "I'm just trying to be realistic with you. Prestige Motors isn't for everyone. I don't want to waste your time." Darrell met her gaze, his expression calm but unwavering. "And what exactly makes you think I'm not your target customer?" Susan hesitated for just a moment. "I've been doing this a long time," she said. "I can tell when someone's out of their depth." "Out of their depth?" Darrell repeated, his voice neutral and thoughtful. "Interesting." There was a flicker of uncertainty in Susan's eyes, but she pressed on. "I'm just being honest. It's better to be upfront than to have someone leave disappointed." Darrell let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head slightly. "Honest, huh? I like honesty. How about this? You let me speak to the owner. Think we can make that happen?" Susan's eyebrows shot up. For the first time, she looked genuinely caught off guard. "The owner?" "That's right," Darrell said, his tone light and almost conversational. "I'd like to have a word with them." Susan's lips twitched in a poor attempt at a smile. "Well, that's not possible today. The owner doesn't just drop by for casual visits. They're a busy person." "I'm sure they are," Darrell said, nodding slightly. "But maybe you could give them a call and let them know I'm here. I think they'd want to meet me." Susan's smile tightened and her patience began to wear thin. "Look, sir, I'm trying to be as polite as possible, but this is getting ridiculous. I have other customers to attend to. If you're serious about buying a car, we can schedule a meeting with one of our sales consultants. Otherwise," Darrell asked, his tone still calm, though an edge had crept in. Susan's eyes narrowed, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "Otherwise, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Darrell stood still, his gaze locked on Susan's for a moment, and the entire showroom seemed to hold its breath. Slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "All right," he said, scrolling through his contacts. "I'll make the call myself." Susan blinked, her brow furrowing. "What are you doing?" "Just calling the owner," Darrell replied, lifting the phone to his ear. "Shouldn't take long." Susan's confidence faltered, her irritation shifting to confusion. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. A few employees around them had stopped what they were doing, their attention drawn to the unfolding situation. Darrell held up a finger as if to say, "Just a moment," then turned slightly away to speak into the phone. "Yeah, it's me. I'm at the dealership. Everything's fine, just a little misunderstanding. Could you let them know I'm here?" He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket, turning back to Susan. "They'll be here shortly," he said simply. Susan stared at him, her mouth slightly open. "Who? Who did you just call?" Darrell didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced around the showroom, noticing the staff watching intently. "Guess we'll find out," he said, his tone almost playful. The tension in the room was palpable, weighing down on everyone present. Susan shifted uncomfortably, her composure beginning to crack. Minutes passed, but the room felt frozen in time. She busied herself with her clipboard, though her movements were stiff and deliberate, revealing her unease. Meanwhile, Darrell stood casually by one of the luxury SUVs, his calm demeanor only adding to the tension. The few employees scattered around the showroom whispered to one another, stealing glances at the unfolding scene. It was clear that everyone was waiting for something or someone. The sound of the main doors opening broke the silence. A sharply dressed man in a navy suit stepped inside, his polished shoes clicking softly against the tile floor. His expression was serious but warm, and his eyes immediately found Darrell. "Mr. Carter," the man said, a wide smile spreading across his face as he approached with an outstretched hand. "So good to see you." Darrell returned the handshake with a firm grip, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Thanks for coming, Alex. I appreciate it." The atmosphere in the room collectively stiffened. Susan nearly dropped her clipboard, her eyes darting between Darrell and Alex, the dealership's regional director. Her confusion quickly turned into visible alarm. "Wait, Mr. Carter?" she echoed, her voice uncertain. Alex turned to her, his friendly demeanor shifting to something more professional, almost curt. "Susan, I see you've already met Mr. Carter." Susan blinked, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for the right words. I didn't realize." "You didn't realize?" Alex finished for her, his tone sharp. "He's the new owner of this dealership." He glanced at Darrell with an apologetic look on his face. "I trust this wasn't your ideal welcome." Darrell raised a hand to stop him. "It's all right, Alex. I think Susan and I just got off on the wrong foot." His voice was calm, but there was a weight to his words that made everyone in the room pay attention. Susan's face turned ashen and she took a step back, clutching her clipboard to her chest like a lifeline. I'm so sorry," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know." "You didn't know what?" Darrell asked, his tone still gentle but firm. "That I could own a place like this. That someone like me might actually belong here." Her eyes widened, and for a moment she seemed utterly lost. "I didn't mean." Darrell held up a hand, cutting her off. "It's fine, Susan, really." He took a step closer, his voice dropping just enough to make everyone lean in. "But let me ask you something. If I hadn't been the owner, would you have treated me any differently? Would you have given me the same respect you'd offer someone who walked in here wearing a suit and tie?" Susan opened her mouth, but no words came out. The silence was deafening. Darrell nodded as if her silence was answer enough. He turned to Alex, his voice taking on a new authority. "Let's gather everyone in the conference room. I think it's time we had a little chat about how things are run around here." The employees filed into the sleek conference room, the air thick with tension. The room, designed to impress, featured all glass walls and modern furnishings, but today it felt stifling. Susan sat near the back, her usual confident demeanor replaced with a nervous stillness. Darrell stood at the head of the table, calm and collected, his presence commanding everyone's attention. Alex remained near the door, arms crossed, his expression unreadable as he watched the staff take their seats. The quiet murmur of whispers faded as Darrell cleared his throat, his gaze sweeping across the group. "Thank you all for joining me on short notice." Darrell began, his tone measured but firm. "For those of you who don't know, my name is Darrell Carter, and as of last month, I'm the new owner of Prestige Motors." There were murmurs of surprise from several employees, their reactions ranging from curiosity to embarrassment. Susan sank lower in her chair, avoiding eye contact. "I came here today dressed casually for a reason," Darrell continued, his voice steady. "I wanted to see how this dealership operates when no one knows who I am. I wanted to experience what a potential customer might feel walking through these doors." He let his words settle for a moment before continuing. "What I experienced today was disappointing. I was judged not for what I could bring to the table, but for how I looked. I'm not here to single anyone out, but we need to discuss what that says about the culture of this dealership." Susan shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her face flushed. Darrell's eyes flicked to her briefly before returning to the group as a whole. "This isn't just about me," he said. "It's about every person who walks through those doors, every customer who doesn't fit someone's preconceived notion of what a luxury car buyer looks like." One of the younger sales associates raised his hand hesitantly. Darrell nodded toward him. "Go ahead, Mr. Carter," the man began nervously. "I think most of us try to treat customers fairly, but sometimes, well, Sometimes it's hard not to make assumptions. Darrell nodded, his expression thoughtful. I get that, he said. We'd all have biases, whether we want to admit it or not. But here's the thing. It's not enough to just try to be fair. We have to actively challenge those biases. We need to create an environment where everyone feels respected, regardless of their appearance, background, or anything else. He paused, allowing his words to sink in. This dealership has built a reputation for excellence, but excellence isn't just about the cars we sell. It's about the experience we provide. From now on, that experience will be built on respect, inclusivity, and fairness. A ripple of agreement spread around the room, though a few faces remained wary. Darrell's gaze settled on Susan, who sat frozen, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Susan, he said gently but firmly, I want to give you the opportunity to speak. Is there anything you'd like to say? All eyes turned to her. She hesitated, her voice barely audible when she finally spoke. I made a mistake, she admitted, her cheeks flushed. I misjudged you, and for that, I'm truly sorry. Darrell nodded, his expression unreadable. Thank you for saying that, he said. I hope this experience will remind all of us, not just you, because change starts with accountability. He turned back to the group. Moving forward, we'll be implementing new training programs to ensure this dealership reflects the values I believe in. Every customer deserves to be treated with dignity, no exceptions. If anyone has an issue with that, now's the time to speak up. The room fell silent, the quiet in the conference room deafening, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. No one spoke, but the weight of Darrell's words lingered, pressing on everyone present. He let the quiet stretch long enough to make his point before speaking again, his voice calm but resolute. Good, he said. I'm glad to see we're all on the same page. Change isn't always easy, but it's necessary, and this dealership is going to lead by example. He took a step away from the table, his hands resting lightly on its edge as he leaned forward slightly. Let me make something clear. I didn't come here today to humiliate anyone. I came to understand what kind of culture I've inherited and how we can improve it. His eyes moved to Susan, who still sat quietly near the back. Susan, he said, his tone softening just enough to show he wasn't attacking her. You're an experienced manager, and I'm sure you've worked hard to get where you are. But today was a wake-up call for you and for all of us. Susan looked up, meeting his gaze for the first time. I understand it, she said, her voice shaky but sincere. I was wrong, and I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Darrell nodded. I believe in second chances, he said simply, but accountability comes first. I'll meet with you one-on-one to discuss next steps. For now, let's focus on moving forward. He straightened, turning his attention back to the rest of the team. We're not just selling cars here. We're building trust, creating relationships, and representing a standard of excellence. If you're on board with that, I'm here to support you every step of the way. A murmur of agreement arose, this time louder and more genuine. The staff seemed to relax, the initial tension giving way to a sense of renewed purpose. Even Alex, who had been standing quietly by the door, nodded in approval. Darrell smiled faintly, a smile that hinted at both relief and determination. All right then, let's get back to work, and remember, how we treat people matters more than anything we sell. As the employees began to file out of the room, Darrell caught Susan lingering by the door. She approached him hesitantly, her hands twisting nervously. Mr. Carter, she began, her voice low, I want to thank you for giving me a chance to do better. I won't let you down. Darrell looked at her for a moment before responding, his voice steady. I hope you mean that, Susan. Actions speak louder than words, but I believe people can change if they're willing to try. She nodded, her eyes earnest. I am. Darrell watched her leave before turning to Alex. Let's set up a meeting with the staff next week, he said. I want to make sure everyone knows what's expected moving forward. Alex grinned, his respect for Darrell evident. You've got it, boss. As Darrell stepped back into the showroom, he glanced around at the cars, their gleaming surfaces reflecting the afternoon light. He thought about the work ahead, but for the first time that day, he felt optimistic. This wasn't just about running a dealership. It was about creating something bigger, a space where people were judged by their character, not their appearance. And Darrell was ready to lead the way.